Hulk Hogan's last will revealed, what he left behind will shock you. Wrestling fans, this is the one video you cannot miss. We uncover Hulk Hogan's final wishes, personal legacy, and how he forever changed professional wrestling. In this powerful exposé, we dive deep into Hulk Hogan's last will and testament, revealing jaw-dropping details about what the Immortal One left behind. From surprising bequests to heartfelt messages, you'll get an inside look at the personal side of the wrestling icon like never before. But that's not all. We also revisit Hogan's incredible biography, from his rise to superstardom in the 1980s to his role in shaping WWE's golden era. Whether you loved him or hated him, Hulkamania ran wild, and his impact still echoes today. The Florida sun was just beginning to dip beneath the horizon when the first sealed envelope arrived at the law offices of Bennett, Cole & Nash in downtown Tampa. Embossed with a red crest and marked "Confidential," final instructions, it was handed directly to senior partner Marcus Nash by a man in a black suit with no name, no words, and no hesitation. Inside that envelope, tucked behind a typed page marked "Last Will and Testament of Terry Jean Ballia," was not just legal language. It was the final message of a man who had become more than a wrestler, more than a celebrity. It was the final chapter in the life of Hulk Hogan, the Immortal One. And what it revealed stunned everyone. Word of Hogan's death had already begun to spread, but the details remained murky. He had been hospitalized days earlier, his condition undisclosed to the public, and fans around the world clung to rumors, some hopeful, some grim. Then, on July 24, 2025, the truth emerged. Hulk Hogan, the man who told a generation of kids to train, say their prayers, and eat their vitamins, was gone. At 71, the voice of Hulkamania had been silenced. But behind the silence was something no one expected, a meticulously written will that would flip the wrestling world on its head. Inside that final document were instructions for everything: who would speak at his funeral, which belt would rest atop his casket, even the music that would play during his final farewell. But more shocking than the details was the intent. Hogan had left messages. Handwritten notes. Personal bequests. And in the quiet of that legal office, Marcus Nash read every word aloud to an audience of stunned family members, old wrestling friends, and WWE executives, each clutching tissues, each struggling to accept the reality. It began with a line that caught everyone off guard. "Brother, the will opened. If you're reading this, then the big boot's been dropped, and I've finally gone over that top rope for the last time." Laughter mixed with grief in the room. Even in death, Hogan had chosen to stay in character. But what followed was no performance. It was raw. It was real. And it was revealing in ways few could have imagined. Hogan's will was 34 pages long, handwritten in part, dictated in others, and authenticated by multiple witnesses. It was updated just 6 months before his passing, during what those close to him now refer to as his final clarity. After years of struggling with surgeries, lawsuits, divorce, public scandals, and the creeping toll of age, Hogan had reportedly spent the better part of his last year trying to make peace with his family, with the wrestling world, and most hauntingly, with himself. One of the first items in the will was not about money or possessions, but about memory. Hogan requested that his red and yellow feather boa and his original WWF World Heavyweight Championship belt, worn during his 1984 title win over the Iron Sheik, be permanently displayed not in WWE headquarters, but in a museum of his own creation. The House of Hulkamania, he called it. An independent public exhibit in Clearwater, Florida, for fans. Not a profit scheme. Not a Vince McMahon vanity project. Just stories, videos, memorabilia, and a single empty chair. "That chair's for anyone who needs a moment," he wrote. "To sit, to think, to remember. I've sat in enough empty chairs in my life to know the power they hold." But the will wasn't all solemn. It was full of surprises. Hulk Hogan left $100,000 to a retired janitor from Madison Square Garden named Luis Santiago. Why? Because Luis once found Hogan crying backstage after a loss to the Ultimate Warrior and offered him a sandwich in silence. He didn't ask for a photo. He didn't ask for an autograph. He just sat with me like I was a man and not a brand, Hogan wrote. He reminded me I was still human when I was starting to forget. That theme, humanity, carried throughout the document. Hogan left instructions for his funeral to be less about glitz and more about grit. No red carpets. No pyrotechnics. No marketing. Just a small service in Clearwater with friends, family, and an open mic. He requested that no one wear suits unless they really wanted to, and that the only people allowed to carry his casket be men and women who had once wrestled him in the ring. If you've dropped an elbow on me, you've earned the right to carry me, he wrote with a wink. And those names? They were a who's who of wrestling history. Ric Flair. Kevin Nash. Scott Hall, though passed, was named with a note: if Scott was here, he'd be on the list. If you can find a way to honor him in the ceremony, do it. We went to hell and back, and I'd do it all again. A pause came in the reading of the will after that section. Flair, present at the table, wiped his face and said nothing. Words weren't needed. Then came the bequests. To his daughter Brooke, Hogan left a trust and the rights to his unreleased music archives. Yes, music. Hogan had reportedly written over 70 songs never made public, many of them emotional ballads and spoken-word pieces about fame, loss, and aging. She always saw the musician in me, even when the world only saw the mustache, he said. To his son Nick, Hogan left something more symbolic, a 1985 Harley-Davidson Softail, with a handwritten note that read, "Ride this when you're lost. It always brought me back home." But the real shock came when the will revealed Hogan had privately reconciled with several people he'd feuded with publicly over the years, some known, some not. One of the biggest names? Randy Macho Man Savage. Although Savage passed in 2011, Hogan revealed in the will that before Randy's death, they had a final phone call. We cried. We laughed. We forgave. And that call healed something in me that had been broken for over a decade. Hogan requested that Savage's brother, Lanny Poffo, be given an original ring-worn robe from WrestleMania V as a symbol of their buried feud and restored brotherhood. The will also contained instructions for donations, millions in fact. Hogan left $2.5 million to children's cancer research, specifically earmarked for Tampa General Hospital. No child should fight alone, he wrote. Not like I did when I was a kid getting beat up for being fat. I became a superhero because I needed one back then. So maybe now I can be that for someone else. Another $1 million was given to a small wrestling school in Georgia, one few people had ever heard of. Hogan described it as the last place where wrestling still feels real. And still, the most personal moments weren't about what Hogan gave away, but what he confessed. Tucked between legal lines were reflections on his legacy, and his regrets. I didn't always get it right, he admitted. I hurt people. I made enemies. I let fame take the wheel too many times. But I loved this business. God, I loved it. Even when it broke me, even when it embarrassed me, even when it forgot me. I never stopped being that little kid with a dream in his head and a promo in his heart. He acknowledged the scandals. The Gawker case. The divorce. The racial slur controversy. He didn't hide from them. I said things that shamed my family and my fans. And I paid the price for them. But I hope in the end, people see I didn't try to be perfect. I tried to be better. And that counts for something. The document also included a letter meant only for Vince McMahon. The contents were not read aloud. But Hogan made it clear it was both an apology and a thank you. No matter how our war ended, he wrote, you gave me the ring to become immortal. That gift is more than money could ever buy. Then, in a twist no one saw coming, Hogan announced that his likeness, the image of Hulk Hogan, the bandana, the mustache, the voice, would be given to a non-profit foundation, not WWE. The Hogan Heart Foundation would manage his branding, using proceeds to support underprivileged youth in sports, mental health programs for retired athletes, and scholarships for single mothers. "My face made millions," Hogan wrote. "Now let it serve millions." The room, by this point, had fallen into a kind of reverent silence. But there was one more message. On the final page of the will was a quote, not Hogan's, but one he had scribbled in the margin beside his signature: "Immortality is not living forever. It's being remembered for how you lived." And then, beneath it, his own words: "I ran wild. I made mistakes. I made memories. And if you're reading this, just know I loved every damn second of it." The will had ended, but the emotions it unleashed had only begun. Outside the building, a growing crowd of fans had gathered. Some wore Hogan shirts. Others held up signs. One, scrawled in black marker, simply read, "Thank you, Hulkster. We'll never forget." Inside, legal representatives began making arrangements to fulfill the will's instructions. Already, discussions were underway for a national broadcast tribute, a wrestling card in his honor, and the building of the House of Hulkamania. But for those closest to him, those who knew Terry Bollea, not just Hulk Hogan, the true weight of the moment lingered in the air like electricity. It wasn't just the end of a career. It wasn't just a legal process. It was the closing of a story that had defined modern wrestling. And yet, the story isn't over. The morning of the funeral arrived with a hush over Clearwater Beach. Palm trees swayed gently in the wind, but the usual hum of coastal traffic and chattering tourists had gone quiet. In their place, silence ruled, a kind of reverence that felt spiritual, almost unreal. Fans from across the country had traveled through the night, some sleeping in cars, others walking barefoot across sidewalks just to be near the service. At the gates of the memorial chapel, an unmarked white flag fluttered gently. Embroidered in gold was a single word: Hulkamania. Despite Hogan's request for a small ceremony, the world had other plans. The chapel, designed to seat 150, was bursting. WWE executives, past legends, rivals, family, even long-estranged friends had all come. Vince McMahon, stoic and visibly older than he appeared at WrestleMania 40, arrived early, flanked by Stephanie and Triple H. No press. No interviews. Just a nod and a heavy breath as he stepped inside. Ric Flair came next, sunglasses on, eyes bloodshot, gripping the hand of Shawn Michaels for support. And then came the wrestlers: John Cena, Randy Orton, Roman Reigns, even CM Punk, each wearing somber black and carrying memories etched in decades of storytelling, pain, and shared glory. The pews were quiet as the organ began to hum softly. And then it happened. The doors opened again, and 6 figures in black stepped forward, lifting Hogan's casket. As requested, it was not gold, not glitzy, but a solid oak finish with subtle red and yellow trim along the sides. Carried by 6 of his in-ring rivals and brothers, Kevin Nash, Edge, Booker T, The Undertaker, Kurt Angle, and Triple H, the casket floated through the chapel like a crown atop shoulders of war. No music played. No announcer spoke. Just silence, broken only by the tears of grown men who once traded punches with the legend now lying peacefully inside that box. On top of the casket, right above the heart, rested the championship belt, the original WWF World Heavyweight title. Faded, cracked, still shining. And beside it, a single bandana. Folded. Unworn. The eulogy began with something Hogan himself had requested: no pastor. No scripted prayer. Just stories. And it was Ric Flair who stood first. "I met Terry when I was the Nature Boy and he was the Immortal One," Flair began, his voice trembling. "But we weren't just gimmicks. We were 2 men who loved this insane, beautiful, unforgiving world of professional wrestling. He once told me, 'Brother, we're all gonna die someday. The question is, did we live big enough?' Well, Terry, you lived bigger than anyone. You lived so big that even death had to wait in line." Applause burst from the room, brief, respectful. Then it was Brooke who rose. Her voice was soft, but steady. He wasn't perfect, she said. He made mistakes. Big ones. But he never stopped trying. He never stopped being a dad. Even when the cameras were gone. Even when the lights were off. My dad always said, legacy isn't what they write in history books. It's what your kids whisper about you when you're gone. I loved him. I love him still. Tears welled up. From the crowd. From behind the podium. Even from the production crew quietly filming for the posthumous WWE Network special set to air weeks later. But then, the tone changed. The final speaker was a surprise. A man not listed on the program. The Undertaker. Dressed in full black, hair tied back, Mark Calloway stepped to the podium and broke character, completely. For 30 years, he said, I went toe-to-toe with Hulk Hogan. But it was never just business. We shared locker rooms. Planes. Injuries. Secrets. He was flawed. Aren't we all? But he was there. Every night. Every crowd. Every city. I watched him build something bigger than wrestling. He made people believe they were stronger than their fears. That they could be heroes. He gave people permission to dream. And that matters. After his final words, Calloway stepped down, bowed his head to the casket, whispered something no microphone could catch, and walked out of the chapel in total silence. No one followed him. No one had to. That moment belonged to him and Hogan. Later that evening, a private gathering was held at the Hogan estate in Bel Air. Away from the fans. Away from the public eye. Here, friends gathered like family. They laughed. They cried. They traded stories about back bumps, beer runs, hotel pranks, and arena riots. And somewhere in the middle of it, Kevin Nash stood up, lifted a glass of whiskey, and said, "This one's for the man who taught us all how to rip a t-shirt in half, and mend a broken heart in the same breath." But the world beyond didn't sit still. The announcement of Hogan's will had sent tremors through the wrestling industry. Within days, the Hogan Hart Foundation launched with more than $5 million in funding, initially contributed by the estate but soon matched by donations from celebrities, wrestlers, and fans alike. WWE pledged to match another $2 million and announced that proceeds from the next WrestleMania would be partially directed to the foundation's youth development wing. They even announced the establishment of the Hulk Hogan Hall of Heroes wing in Stamford, an expansion of the company's Hall of Fame to include charitable legends and off-screen contributions to wrestling culture. Meanwhile, rumors swirled. Who would control Hogan's brand? His image? Could WWE still use Real American without legal hurdles? But all of that was addressed quickly and clearly. A statement from Hogan's longtime attorney confirmed that WWE retained rights to use all footage, likenesses, and merchandising under previous agreements, but all new uses of Hogan's image would be subject to approval by the Hogan Hart Board, chaired by Brooke herself. For some, it felt like the end of an era. For others, it felt like Hogan had given wrestling one final promo. Except this time, it wasn't for a main event. It was for something more eternal. A reminder that behind the muscle, behind the charisma, behind the "whatcha gonna do" catchphrases, there was a man who deeply, fiercely loved his fans, and never wanted them to forget it. Over the next few weeks, tributes poured in. The Empire State Building lit up in red and yellow. Madison Square Garden aired a tribute montage across all their screens. Even ESPN ran a special segment titled The Immortal Legacy, hosted by Stephen A. Smith, who declared on live television, "There is no WWE without Hulk Hogan. Period. He was the blueprint, the storm, the icon." But it was one moment, quiet, unscripted, that touched hearts around the globe. At a small WWE house show in Tampa, an unadvertised tribute took place. The lights dimmed. The crowd fell quiet. And suddenly, Hogan's entrance music hit. Real American blared through the arena. But no one came out. No pyro. No action. Just a spotlight on an empty ramp. And a pair of yellow boots resting at the top. The fans didn't boo. They didn't chant. They stood. Every single person. Standing in a silent ovation that grew into cheers. Grown men wept. Children clapped. And somewhere, in the silence behind those cheers, the echo of Hogan's legacy rumbled like thunder. And just when the crowd thought the moment was over, the LED board lit up with one final message: Hulkamania never dies. Back at the Hogan estate, tucked away inside a cedar box with brass hinges, was one more item that hadn't yet made its way into the public conversation: an unpublished autobiography. It wasn't meant for bookstores. It wasn't meant for headlines. Hogan had handwritten it over the last 3 years of his life and labeled it simply, "For When I'm Gone." It was not about the matches, the merchandise, or the fame. It was a confession. A journal. A quiet reckoning of a loud life. Inside its pages, Hogan reflected on everything the world had seen, and everything it hadn't. He wrote of his early years playing bass guitar in smoky bars before ever stepping into a ring. He described the moment Vince McMahon Sr. told him, "You've got something, kid," and how those words changed the course of his life. He recalled with warmth the first time he walked through the curtain at Madison Square Garden to a crowd of roaring fans in 1980, the lights hitting him like a tidal wave, the cheers almost knocking him off his feet. But the real beauty of the journal came in its vulnerability. Hogan admitted to the years he feared irrelevance, to the nights he sat in hotel rooms questioning if he was still loved. He wrote about the weight of being a symbol, of feeling pressure to always be the strongest man in the room, even when his back was broken, both physically and spiritually. "I spent years pretending I was indestructible," one passage read. "But what I didn't know was that pretending too long makes you forget how to ask for help when you need it most." He confessed to pain, lots of it. The physical pain from hip surgeries, spinal fusions, and decades of wear and tear that turned his mornings into a battleground. The emotional pain from his public scandals, the friendships he lost, the marriages that crumbled. He didn't blame anyone. Not even the media. Not even himself. He simply acknowledged it, owned it. One particularly striking entry was dated just after the death of Scott Hall. "When Scott passed, I felt something in me go quiet," he wrote. He was wild. Beautifully chaotic. But beneath it all, he was loyal. He'd call me when I was down. He never let me drift too far into my own BS. I miss him. The final pages of the journal were written in noticeably shakier handwriting, suggesting they were penned in his final months. They weren't dramatic. They weren't about legacy or brand or business. They were about family. "I don't know how people will remember me," he wrote. "Maybe as the guy who tore his shirt off. Maybe as the guy who made wrestling bigger than life. Or maybe as the guy who messed up and tried to fix it before the clock ran out. But if my kids remember me as someone who never stopped trying to be better, that's enough." That journal is now set to be included in a permanent rotating exhibit at the House of Hulkamania, which officially broke ground 2 weeks after his funeral. Located just miles from Hogan's former beachfront home in Clearwater, the museum will showcase not just memorabilia, but moments, the quiet ones. Personal videos. Unseen letters. Fan drawings he saved. The boots he wore at WrestleMania 3. The hospital bracelet from one of his back surgeries. A gold-plated dumbbell that reads, "Keep pushing, even when it hurts." The museum, unlike the WWE Hall of Fame, is not owned by the company. It's funded and operated independently by the foundation, with oversight from a board that includes Brooke Hogan, Titus O'Neil, and longtime friend Jimmy Hart. Their mission? To preserve not just the icon, but the man. And that man was complicated. He was the golden child of the 80s. A household name. A real-life action figure in a world of make-believe. He brought pro wrestling into the mainstream, turned arenas into temples, and gave fans a hero to believe in. But he also battled demons, public and private. He said things that hurt people. He made choices that drew criticism. And still, somehow, his story feels redemptive. Because Hogan never stopped coming back. He came back after injury. After lawsuits. After disgrace. He showed up, over and over, to own his mistakes and try again. That's the part people forget. Not the entrances or the poses. But the return. The refusal to stay down. The way he treated each chapter, no matter how broken, as a chance to rewrite the next. At WWE headquarters, one of the most powerful tributes came not from a superstar, but from a producer. A man who worked lighting rigs and setups for pay-per-views for over 20 years. I remember being on the road with Hulk in '95, he recalled. We were in Omaha. Show was late. I was exhausted, about to fall asleep backstage. And he walks up to me with a sandwich and says, "You look like you haven't eaten in 12 hours, brother. This is your ring too." He got it. He really got it. In the weeks that followed, WWE released an emotional 3-part mini-documentary titled Hogan, Beyond the Ring. It chronicled not just his matches, but the man backstage, the way he shook every hand, signed every poster, hugged every child at Make-A-Wish visits. The final episode ended with rare home footage of Hogan playing catch with a young fan at a charity barbecue. The boy tosses the ball too far. Hogan runs after it, knees aching, smiling like a child himself. The video fades out on Hogan saying, "Life's short, brother. But if you're lucky, you get to live a little piece of forever in someone's memory." In that moment, you realize, he already has. On the digital front, the hashtag #ThankYouHogan hashtag exploded globally, with tributes pouring in from celebrities, athletes, and even former critics. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson shared a video recalling his first match against Hogan at WrestleMania X8. "That crowd, that energy, it was all about him," Johnson said. "That night, I was a student again. And he was the teacher of magic." Stone Cold Steve Austin posted a quiet photo of Hogan's locker room boots and wrote only 3 words, "He showed us." Even Sasha Banks, who had previously voiced criticism of some of Hogan's past comments, posted a message of respect. "Legends are complex. So are people. Rest in power, Hulk. You left a mark that time won't erase." In the end, what remains isn't the scandals. It isn't the belts. It isn't even the matches. It's the moments. The way kids stood on couches and tore their t-shirts open. The way a generation believed they could be larger than life if they just flexed a little harder, believed a little stronger, and shouted "Whatcha gonna do?" into the void. It's in the silence of an empty arena where his music once played. It's in the echo of cheers that refused to fade. It's in every fan who looked up at the ring and saw not just a wrestler, but a real-life superhero. Because Hulk Hogan wasn't immortal. But Hulkamania? Hulkamania lives forever. The Hogan Heart Foundation officially opened its doors to the public on a bright Monday morning, 3 months to the day since Hulk Hogan's passing. Hundreds waited outside under a wide Florida sky, many wearing vintage t-shirts with his iconic silhouette stretched across the chest, others holding signs that simply read, "Thank you, Hulkster." The foundation's motto, carved into stone at the entrance, was simple but powerful: strength, honor, redemption. It wasn't just a museum. It was a sanctuary. Inside, the halls glowed with nostalgia. Videos of Hogan's earliest matches played on loop beside framed letters from fans, some dating back to the 1980s, others sent just days before his death. One entire room had been dedicated to WrestleMania 3, the site of his legendary body slam on Andre the Giant. Another, dimly lit, featured a wall lined with photos of Hogan and children from Make-A-Wish visits. That room, more than any other, made even the toughest fans fall silent. No lights. No promos. Just still frames of joy, and the quiet reminder that behind the character was a man who, more often than not, showed up when it mattered. But perhaps the most unexpected tribute was the room dedicated to Hogan's mistakes. Yes, his mistakes. It was a bold move, especially in an industry that often chooses to protect its legends by editing out the ugly parts. But Hogan had requested this room himself. It featured quotes from his apologies, public statements he made during some of the darkest chapters of his life, clips of interviews where he acknowledged his faults, newspaper clippings, court documents, even criticism. At the center stood a glass case containing a handwritten note by Hogan, dated a year before his death. I said things I wish I could erase. I hurt people I wish I could heal. But if this room teaches anything, I hope it's that heroes aren't perfect, they just try to be better. Every day. Until the very end. The choice to display it all, unfiltered, unedited, was met with both praise and pain. But for many fans, it was exactly what they needed. A reminder that redemption isn't about forgetting. It's about changing. Outside, the wrestling world was changing too. At Monday Night Raw, just 1 week after the Foundation's launch, WWE aired a 12-minute video tribute. Narrated by John Cena, the segment opened with grainy footage of Hogan walking into his first WWF locker room. It followed his rise, his clash with Andre, his heel turn with the NWO, his return to the red and yellow. But more than that, it lingered on his laughter backstage, his tears at Hall of Fame ceremonies, his long pauses during interviews where he struggled to find words. I've stood across the ring from him, Cena said in voiceover. But more importantly, I stood beside him. He taught us that strength is more than muscle. It's being willing to admit when you're wrong, and still show up anyway. As the video ended, the crowd rose to their feet. For over 4 minutes, the arena vibrated with chants of "Thank you, Hogan." No pyro. No lights. Just gratitude. A sea of voices, unified. That same week, AEW aired their own tribute. Though Hogan had never wrestled in an AEW ring, Tony Khan released a statement acknowledging Hogan's impact on the industry as a whole. Without Hulk Hogan, professional wrestling would not be where it is today. His legacy transcends promotions, boundaries, and generations. But the most emotional reaction came from an unlikely source. Linda Hogan, Hogan's ex-wife, appeared on Good Morning America just 2 days after the tribute aired. For the first time in years, she spoke about him publicly. "We had our battles," she admitted. "But Terry was the love of my life in a way no one else could ever be. We raised a family. We built a life. And even though we went our separate ways, I never stopped rooting for him. I never stopped caring." The world saw Hulk Hogan. "I saw the man who would sit in the driveway with our dog for hours because our son was crying inside and needed space. I saw the man who called his mom every Sunday. Who cried when our daughter sang at school. He wasn't perfect. But he was real. And that's more powerful than any character." Her words sparked renewed appreciation and reopened old wounds. People revisited old interviews, documentaries, and matches. Hogan's name began trending again. Not because of controversy. But because people wanted to remember. They needed to. In the months that followed, several projects were greenlit to further his legacy. Netflix announced an upcoming dramatized miniseries titled Immortal, The Hulk Hogan Story, produced by Dwayne Johnson and directed by Jon Favreau. WWE confirmed a full-length documentary titled Terry Beyond the Bandana to be released on Peacock, promising never-before-seen footage, journal entries, and interviews with those closest to him, including his long-estranged brother, Alan, who had privately reconciled with Hogan just 6 months before his death. Wrestling schools around the country saw a spike in enrollment, with many citing Hogan as their inspiration. One child, just 9 years old, went viral after he was filmed entering a Florida wrestling gym in full red and yellow, shouting, "I'm training to be the next Immortal." But beyond the media, beyond the legacy, the most lasting change may have been internal, within the wrestling industry itself. Locker room culture began to shift. WWE veterans began openly discussing the importance of mental health, with Roman Reigns and Kevin Owens hosting backstage check-ins for younger talent. At the Performance Center, a new motto was painted on the wall: strong in body, stronger in heart. Inspired, they said, by Hogan's last will. Even Vince McMahon, who had remained largely silent during the immediate fallout, made a rare appearance on WWE Backstage months later. Asked if he had any final words for Hogan, he paused. "He built this place," Vince said. "Brick by brick. Show by show. Body slam by body slam. He built it. And I'll never forget that. None of us will." As the one-year anniversary of his death approached, the House of Hulkamania prepared for its first major memorial event. Thousands were expected to gather. Some to honor the icon. Others to heal. All to remember. At the heart of the stage, the same championship belt rested in a spotlight. And behind it, the last image ever taken of Hogan, sitting in a rocking chair on the back porch of his Clearwater home, looking out over the water, holding a notebook in his hand. He wasn't posing. He wasn't flexing. He was just still. And somehow, in that stillness, the noise of his legacy echoed louder than ever. Because in the end, Hulk Hogan didn't just change wrestling. He changed people. He gave them permission to believe. To forgive. To try again. And if that isn't immortal, what is?